Hi, it's Steph, and today I thought that I would share with you some June garden happenings. There's been a lot of things going on over the last couple of weeks, and so I'm going to share with you a few of those things. Some plant hauls, some changes I'm making in the garden, and even a gardener's road trip. One of the first nurseries that I visited this season that was an independent nursery was a place called Avante Gardens. If you're local to southern New England, they are located in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, and it's such a hidden little gem. I got to talking to the owner, and she tries primarily to grow native plants in an organic fashion, and she's a beekeeper. So I was really enjoying the place. It has a beautiful, huge oak tree in the center, and it just had a really magical feel. But I picked up a couple of things while I was at Avante Gardens, and one of them was one of these Hakonechloa Japanese forest grasses. This is the Aureola, and I bought this to replace one of mine in my Japanese maple garden that had died last season. So I was happy to pick up another one. I also picked up in all gold Hakonechloa. Now this one I'm planning on planting underneath my magnolia to offer a little bit of gold and a pop of color in that shady spot. So this one is a larger container and it's nice and full, and yeah, I really love these grasses. And I picked up two plants that have been on my wish list. Now, I'm sure many of you do this, but on my cell phone, I have a notes section in which I have a plant wish list. And I really wanted some Thalictrum. It's a tongue twister, Thalictrum. And so it's also known as meadow rue, the common name. I originally went in looking for the black stockings variety, but then I found this one, and when I purchased it, it was in bloom, and it had this really beautiful white, light pink kind of pom-pom. So this one here is called Thalictrum Nimbus Pink. It's a compact Thalictrum hybrid with fluffy pink flowers, and it gets to be 24 to 30 inches in height. It has dark tinted stems in late spring and early summer, and it enjoys evenly moist soil. So this one was a wish list plant that I was happy to add. And another wish list plant was this one here. This is Amsonia hubrichtii. I've wanted this one for a couple of seasons now, and I can't find it. Well, it wasn't that easy to find, I should say, but Avante had it. And while it looks a little small now, these get to be quite large at about 3 feet wide by 3 feet tall. And the great thing about this is that you get interest in spring with these light star-shaped blue flowers. And then in fall, it gets the most amazing golden yellow color. This grouping of plants here and a couple of others that I'll show you that are out and about in the garden came from a Japanese maple conifer and bonsai garden in Tolan, Connecticut. Now, I have been collecting conifers and Japanese maples for a couple of years for that new garden area that we're working on. But I have typically ordered my Japanese maples online, most of them. I have found a couple at local nurseries, and a few of the more unique varieties I had to source online. One of my favorite sources for online Japanese maples is Wheeping Farms, and the person who I speak to when I make my orders is Lucille Whitman. The thing with me ordering trees from Lucille is that she's in Oregon and I'm all the way in Massachusetts. So when I order trees, they take sometimes 9 to 10 days before I get them. So if I don't order them in early spring, I run the risk of the trees getting stressed in shipment. And also, the further your tree has to travel, the more you're going to pay in shipping charges. So I've loved the trees that I've ordered from Lucille before, but I've always been looking for a local place that I could visit to purchase some Japanese maples and conifers. And recently, I was able to find out that there was this farm in Connecticut, which is still at least an hour and a half away from me, but much closer than having something shipped across country. So here are the items that I purchased at Tolan Farms in Connecticut. This is a beautiful conifer that I've been after for a couple of years, another one of those that was on my wish list. And this is a Taylor's Sunburst Lodgepole pine. And in the spring, it gets these beautiful golden tips that will then fade to just this blue-green needles, the blue-green needles that you see here. But it's a really beautiful conifer, and it is slow growing. So I am looking specifically for very slow growing, or what is considered dwarf conifers, for this new Japanese maple garden that I'm working on, because I don't want to deal with something that's going to outgrow its space too quickly. This Taylor's Sunburst Lodgepole pine has a bright golden new growth. It goes to yellow, then green. It's upright and has a narrow habit, and it'll reach 6 feet in 10 years. So Pinus contorta Taylor's Sunburst. The next conifer that I picked up, this is called a Chirimen Hinoki, and it will only get to be about 2 to 3 feet tall and only about 1 foot wide. And it'll take upwards of 10 years to get there. So I thought it was really cool. It almost looks like a cactus if you look at it from there, right? It's got a really cool shape. And so I was really intrigued and excited to grow this one in my garden. And this here is a larch. And a larch is actually a really weeping type, and it's soft, really soft needles, a weeping type evergreen or conifer, and you have to train it. So depending on how you train it in terms of staking and allowing it to weep will depend how big it gets. So typically with weeping varieties of conifers, you can train them to stay pretty compact. And so while I don't know the variety of this larch, I am going to try to put it in a spot where I can give it some space and try to train it into a beautiful weeping specimen. I don't have much experience with that, but I'm excited to learn and to give it a shot. And this guy here is an umbrella pine. Now, I have adored umbrella pines for a really long time, but the green umbrella pines can get quite large, and I didn't really have an idea of where I would dedicate some space to a really large umbrella pine, but when I saw this golden one, I thought that this would be a great addition to put in that area because we are backed up against a lot of green trees. So anytime that I can add a blue or a yellow conifer, I get really excited about it. So this one here is Ossorio's gold umbrella pine. It's also a very slow growing conifer. It has golden needles, an upright pyramidal habit. Now, the research I did online for this particular variety, the Ossorio's Gold, says that it does get probably upwards of 6 feet tall and about 4 to 5 feet wide. So I am going to place it at the corner of one of my beds so that it has ample space to fill that corner. But I thought that this one was really beautiful. And this funky guy here, we ended up with this because George thought it was really funny looking. So it was almost a joke, really. And this here is called a Pinus Mugo Winter Gold. The thing that attracted us to this is we were talking to Hassan, which is the owner of this farm, Tolan Farms in Connecticut, and he's actually wonderful. And he got to speaking to us, and he said that this tree has the most beautiful winter color. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it does in the winter. Here's a maple that I picked up at Hassan's farm, Tolan Farm in Connecticut. This is a Moonrise Japanese maple. And I already have a Moonrise that's a little bit bigger, and maybe eventually it'll end up in our front yard somewhere. The Moonrise is a full moon maple, so it has these really large leaves, and the new foliage is red, and it has really beautiful coloring. We also picked up this Japanese maple, which is called Burgundy Lace. It has a burgundy lace leaf type foliage. And George really liked the structure of this one, the shape of it. It had really nice, graceful, arching branches. And these 3 plants here I picked up on one of my local box store shopping trips to Lowe's. And 2 of them were actually on my wish list, and 1 was just too beautiful to leave behind. And I picked up this here, which is a Dark Side of the Moon Astilbe. This is the first year that this particular Astilbe has been available at the local box store. Typically what happens is once a plant is introduced by proven winners, I notice that it first goes to local nurseries, and then maybe a year or so later it will show up at the box stores. And so this year was the year for this Dark Side of the Moon Astilbe. Something that is really interesting about this Astilbe is that it is rated to grow in both shade and in sun. But what I really loved about it was this gorgeous dark foliage. Now, it was a good size, and so I just picked up 1 because I want to test it out. Also, I think that it will fill a good space and be sort of a specimen plant. So you can always buy plants in groupings, but I tend to like to buy plants depending on what it is. I will sometimes buy groups of 3, but mostly if it's something new to my garden that I'm just trying to try out, I will buy 1, as in the case with this plant. So the Proven Winners Dark Side of the Moon Astilbe, this container here was a 1 gallon, and at Lowe's it cost $15.98. And it says here that it gets to be 20 to 22 inches in height, needs 24-inch spacing, and it is hardy in zones 4 through 9 or down to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. It blooms midsummer to late summer, and it likes full sun to full shade. That and an Astilbe is amazing because typically Astilbe are a shade plant. This one I was happy to add to my collection. And another one that's been on my list for a long time is this goat's beard. Now this one here is called Chantilly lace. It's also by proven winners, and it is a perennial. The common name or the botanical name for it is Aruncus. This is also a 1 gallon size, and it was $15.98. And it says that it is a medium height plant at 30 to 32 inches in height, needs 40-inch spacing, and it is hardy in zones 3 through 7 or to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. It blooms early summer to midsummer, and it likes sun to shade. So this is another one that can tolerate both sun and shade. Both of these are going to be planted in a part sun situation, so I'm really excited to have added both of these to my collection. And lastly, from Lowe's, this beautiful buttery, creamy yellow Columbine. It is called Early Bird Yellow Columbine. It blooms in spring. It's an upright perennial. It's part sun, and let's see how big it gets. It's hardy to zone 3 or -30 to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and it gets to be 9 to 11 inches in height and 8 to 10 inches wide. But the blooms on these were so beautiful, I just had to have it. And my last plant haul for the last month or so, I've been collecting all of these plants, so now the hard work is to get them in the ground, right? But recently I took a trip with a couple of girls that I met on Instagram through their gardening pages to Pennsylvania, and it was great. It was about 3 days that we spent in Pennsylvania doing some of the gardening things, like visiting Longwood Gardens, Chanticleer, and we even got a trip to a nursery in. And whenever I go somewhere further from home, I do like to check out nurseries. If you do that as well, comment below. I think it's really fun. So my trip souvenirs were, now we were in a car, so we couldn't get overzealous with how many plants we bought. As I was traveling in my friend Maureen's car, I tried to limit myself to only these 2 plants, but I was really intrigued by this particular grass. Now I showed you that I had purchased a couple of Japanese forest grasses, Hakonechloa. I really enjoy them, but this variety I had never seen before. It's called Beni Kazi, Japanese forest grass. And while it looks green now, the interesting thing is that it has a really beautiful red fall color. So we're going to see how that changes in the fall, and I'll keep you posted. But I purchased this one as a trip souvenir. And a new coneflower. If you've been around my channel since last summer, you would have known that I have quite a few coneflowers at this point, and I really enjoy them. In fact, in my top 5 perennials video, I listed coneflower as my #1 favorite. So when I found this one, I just had to add it. This particular variety is called Sunseekers Rainbow, and this bloom is just starting to open up now. But I will zoom in on this photo here. And the Sunseekers Rainbow Coneflower is a perennial. It blooms midsummer through autumn with regular deadheading. So anytime that you have coneflowers, if you deadhead them to the bottom, it'll keep the plant producing blooms. If you don't deadhead, then it'll signal the plant that it is done for the season. It'll start setting seed and the bloom production will stop. So as long as you continue to deadhead it, it will continue to push buds for you for a good long while. And this one here says it gets to be 18 to 24 inches in height and needs 18 to 24 inch spacing, and it is hardy in zones 4 through 9. Now, coneflowers like a well-draining soil in a sunny spot. So as long as you give them those conditions, they are typically happy and will bloom beautifully for you. But I was happy to add this new coneflower to my collection. Over the next couple of weeks, I will put together some video footage of that Pennsylvania trip. And if you ever get an opportunity to do something similar, I highly recommend it, because it is such a great place to visit for garden lovers. And some garden happenings. When I was away in Pennsylvania on my girls' gardening trip, we had visited some beautiful gardens, which included some gorgeous roses. And it got me thinking about my roses that I have planted in this bed behind me and how much they struggle. And I was really inspired to try to get these roses nursed back to health. So when I was talking to the girls on our trip, their suggestion was to dig them up and move them to a different spot in the garden, which made perfect sense because in general, when you garden and you have a plant that you put in one spot, if it's not doing well, you will sometimes move it to a new spot in which it then begins to thrive. So that was a wonderful suggestion, and I thought that what I would do when I came home from my trip is that I would dig up the roses that I had in this bed that were struggling and put them in some pots in what I'm now calling my rose intensive care unit. Now, the reasons that I think my roses struggle in this bed is because this area here is really wet and holds on to a lot of moisture. So even though we haven't had a lot of rain, if I poke my finger in the soil here, it still feels relatively moist. So roses tend to like to be grown in a very well-draining soil that tends to lean a bit dry, and they like a lot of sun. And while they get a lot of sun here, I think they just stood really wet. So the issues that I experienced with these roses were they would get a lot of black spot, yellow leaf drop, and the canes were always really thin and generally unhealthy. And after every winter, I always get a lot of dieback. So I dug up the roses. They're now in these pots. In the pots, I included a mix of some lobster compost, some coconut coir, some worm castings, a little bit of biotone startup fertilizer, and a sprinkle of some bone meal to help with some root development. So my goal is to try to nurse these back to health over the next couple of months, and I'm hoping that they begin to thrive and that I can find a better suited spot in the garden for them. But I would like to ask all of you, if you are good at growing roses, if you have any tips for me, any suggestions on what I can do to improve the health of my roses. Well, as you can see from today's video, there is still lots going on in the garden. Plants to be planted, lots of them, which still doesn't stop me from bringing home the occasional plant, which gives me even more plants to plant, but so it goes. I still have a little bit of weeding and some edging, and I'm hopeful that in the next couple of weeks we can finally get everything mulched, but we do what we can when we can, and eventually it all gets done. So if you've enjoyed this video, I would love it if you could give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't had a chance to subscribe to the channel, if you could do that, that'd be awesome. And as always, thank you for spending your time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the thumbs up button, and please consider subscribing so you don't miss any of my future videos. And we'll see you soon.